Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Nisha Singh, and I'm a thematic facilitator for FinEquity. Welcome to this webinar on driving systemic change to close financing gaps for women entrepreneurs. We're very pleased to be co-hosting this with the WeFi team. We have a very exciting set of speakers for you. So it's going to be a great conversation for the next hour. As many of you might know, that women entrepreneurs are the key to inclusive economic growth. Despite the fact that they face a number of challenges in access to capital and other support, there's significant research that shows that if women are able to establish and expand their businesses at the same rate as men, it would add about $5 to $6 trillion to the global economy, which is roughly the GDP of Germany. So it's a pretty substantial opportunity. But one of the key challenges that continues to exist is the lack of sufficient sex disaggregated data, both the collection and use, and that's the focus of our discussion today. So we're going to jump right in because there's a lot of questions we have, and I know you all have. Before I introduce our speakers, just a couple of housekeeping items. You can drop your questions in the chat. My colleagues are monitoring it. We have time for Q&A towards the end, but please drop in your questions so that you don't have to wait till then, and we'll take them towards the end. If we run out of time, we'll get them answered when we publish the recording of this session. We're using not too many slides, but those and the recording will be made available through the FinEquity website. So with that, let me go forward and introduce our speakers. We have Wendy Teleki, who is the head of the WeFi Secretariat. We have Esselina McComb, the CEO of FSD Mozambique. Inez Murray, the CEO of Financial Alliance for Women. Juan Carlos Izaguirre, who's a senior financial sector specialist with CGAP, who's stepping in for Tatiana today, who was supposed to be on the webinar. And as I said, my name is Nisha Singh, and I'm a thematic lead with FinEquity, and I will be moderating this discussion. So jumping right in, we'll start with Juan Carlos. So Juan Carlos, CGAP recently published a landscape research piece on supply side sex disaggregated data. We'll drop the link in the chat, but could you give this audience a little bit of a summary of what you found, why you decided to do this, and what some of the key things you found in your landscape research were?
Thank you very much, Nisha, and it's a very great pleasure to be part of this panel and this event and be a minority whenever in this opportunity. So it's great to be here. In terms of our report, actually our study aimed to look at all different kind of initiatives of the financial inclusion community to support gender data in the past couple of decades, more or less. And we actually found quite important progress in this agenda, thanks to a range of global and local initiatives that have increased understanding of the benefits of using gender disaggregated data in the financial sector, and have used such data to take steps to reduce gender gaps in the financial inclusion and promote inclusive growth. For example, we saw that countries like Bangladesh, Ecuador, Morocco, in these countries, regulators have used already gender data to collect and produce publicly available statistics and reports to increase awareness, to build capacity, and promote collaboration and consultations among key stakeholders. Some authorities actually have gone a little bit beyond that. For example, in Rwanda, we saw that supply-side gender data analysis showed that a lack of traditional collateral is a key barrier for women who need access to funds to start or to grow their businesses. And as a response, the government established a Women's Guarantee Fund for economically active women who have no collateral and no credit history. Also, we saw in Chile, the state-owned commercial bank, Banco Estado, has set up a program to provide women entrepreneurs with access to business capital, education, networking opportunities that were based on insights from their gender disaggregated data. And in Mexico, supply-side data analysis had revealed that women were not only saving lower amounts for their retirement, but were also doing so less frequently than men. This was probably likely due to lower wages and higher informality in the job market. And as a response, the pension regulator developed programs to increase women's retirement savings after discovering a gap between men's and women's rates of savings through their analysis of gender disaggregated data. So we saw some successful initiatives, and we noticed that having a strong culture of data-driven, evidence-based policy making, as well as a strong will and committed gender data champions in these authorities, were quite critical to launching supply-side gender disaggregated data collection efforts. Now, while seeing those important examples of jurisdictions taking step forward, we also identified that in general, across the board, most progress had happened in the use of demand-side data, and there were still significant gaps in the generation, and especially the use of administrative transactional supply-side data, or data generated by financial services providers and used by providers themselves and supervisory authorities. So we came up with three main lessons from our research. First, that there is not yet an ideal or standard set of best practices that guide authorities in the collection and use of supply-side gender-segregated data in financial sector. The second was that despite considerable progress in the availability of supply-side data, their collection and usage are still suboptimal. And the third one was that to unlock the potential of gender-segregated data to contribute to women's financial inclusion and women's economic empowerment, there's need for a more systematic approach and guidance toward effective ways to collect and use this kind of data by authorities that can also be useful to other actors in the ecosystem.
Great. So you've already highlighted some of the challenges, some of, what the recommendations were. Do you want to very quickly touch on what CGAP plans to do before we go to our next speaker?
Sure. Yeah, I think a key point is that we really highlighted four kind of challenges that we think we can help by producing some guidance, additional guidance related to those key challenges. The first challenge is around data available not having adequate quality in terms of accuracy, completeness, scope, comparability, and timeliness. So we need that it's going to be useful to provide some additional guidance for authorities, especially to help them coordinate better, agree on common standards and definitions for providers, help them also themselves provide further guidance and instructions and explanations on data submissions for providers. The second one is the key challenge is that the data collected seem to be not totally fit for purpose. So we think that it would be useful to help authorities and providers understand why it's important to go beyond the kind of traditional type of indicators of number of women accessing financial services, but go a little bit beyond and think about indicators that look at actual customer experiences, customer risks, and customer outcomes of using financial services. The third one is lack of awareness about the benefits of using data. So I think important to provide guidance and tools for different actors to publish market level data and statistics and reports. And the fourth challenge is in terms of authorities lacking the power, willingness, and coordination on data sharing and capacity to use and act on data collected. So we think it's going to be useful for us to provide them with some extra guidance on how to build their capacity, strengthen their capacity, deal with data privacy, data collection, data usage capabilities, and we'll be happy to do this in the next 3 years of our project. Thank you, Nish.
Great. Thanks, Juan Carlos. And you set it up really well for me to introduce our next speaker. And I would like to invite Wendy Telecki to the virtual stage to talk a little bit about the newly launched We Finance Code and how it's actually going to address some of these challenges that Juan Carlos was talking about the lack of coordination and the lack of availability and the will to use sex disaggregated data. So Wendy, I will hand it over to you. And Jenny, if you could pull up the slides.
Thank you, Nisha, and thanks, Juan Carlos, and to the whole FinEquity team. It's been really great to collaborate with you, and there's just so much alignment in terms of our goals and what we have identified as the challenges and opportunities going forward. It's great to have an opportunity to speak to all of you today. I think most of you probably know WeFi is a program that sits in the World Bank, but is supported by a number of donors, and we work across all of the multilateral development banks to support mostly small and medium enterprises, women-led small and medium enterprises around the world. And we work in about 70 countries now. And through our multilateral development bank partners, we're working with about 400 different partners on the ground in these countries. And so a few years ago, we stepped back and started looking at this array of activities that we had, much like Juan Carlos was saying, there's lots of green shoots and different activities with individual institutions or in a specific country, looking at how to, kind of solve access to finance challenges. And we wanted to think more systemically and think about how we could mobilize all of our MDB partners, all of the partners that they're working with, to really systemically address this kind of critical bottleneck for closing women entrepreneurs' finance gaps, and focus a lot on the enterprise side, which is where we are. And we know that on sex disaggregated data gaps, there's a lot of work that's happening, but much of it happens to be on the consumer side, looking at accounts, looking at transactions, maybe at the micro enterprise level, but we're seeing very little progress on the enterprise level, especially as you get to more formal enterprises. We know OECD collects the data in their SME scoreboard, and only 2 countries are reporting how much financing is going to women-led enterprises at the country level. IMF tried to include this information in their financial access survey and had to discontinue it because so few countries were including that data. And so we've now got them to start including that again as a pilot. So we came up with the idea of this system change effort called the We Finance Code after learning about an initiative that was done in the UK called the Investing in Women Code, which had a similar structure. And in essence, what the code does, and if we can go, well, we'll just skip the next slide because I think I can pass through that. We all know what the gaps are for women entrepreneurs. So if we go to the next slide, the idea behind the code is very simple. The code is a commitment that financial institutions make and ecosystem partners support that allows institutions to commit in 3 areas. One is each institution that signs on to the code commits to identifying someone in their institution who will be a leader for advocating for women entrepreneurs in their organization and for women more broadly in their organization and also externally. So the first step for each institution is to identify a champion who will really advocate for supporting women entrepreneurs within the institution. And this is all financial institutions, so institutions that do have programs to finance women entrepreneurs and SMEs and micro enterprises. The second commitment that each institution makes, now if we go back to the previous slide, the second commitment each institution makes is to take action on closing financing gaps for women. So they have to make commitments either to develop new financing lines, new products and services. Maybe they're developing new training programs for women entrepreneurs, financial literacy programs, gender lens strategies. So there's a full array of activities that they can commit to under this. And the third one, and the one where I think, a lot of the work starts, is on data. Every institution that commits to signs onto the code has to commit to tracking and reporting 5 key indicators on their financing for women-led SMEs, micro and SMEs. So they have to collect and report on how many enterprises are being financed on a sex disaggregated basis, how much financing is going out, so the volume of funding, the rate of approvals for women versus men at the enterprise level, the amount of deposits, sex disaggregated, and MPLs. So every institution that signs onto the code will voluntarily commit to collecting and reporting this data to a national aggregator. And that's the core of the code. But what's really important about the code is that it will be introduced at the country level and bring together not just the financial institutions, but the whole ecosystem to support those commitments. And that means working with regulators and having the regulators be part of the coalition and sometimes leading that coalition, the Bankers Association, maybe the Venture Capital Association, making sure credit bureaus and other financial infrastructure players are part of this, bringing in researchers to really understand what's happening with product development or impact, bringing in donors to help support work in terms of blended finance and technical assistance is coming in. So really galvanizing the whole ecosystem to move forward with this goal of improving data and actions in a very concentrated and rapid way, so that everybody's working together to address this challenge simultaneously and rapidly at the country level. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just very quickly, I'll let others talk a little bit more about this, but we have a lot of tools on our website to help each country roll out the code. We have 24 countries now that have agreed to pilot the code. We've launched in Indonesia, we've launched in Fiji, Dominican Republic, the Netherlands has also launched a code, and each country goes through several steps to make this happen, identifying champions, then building the broader coalition, customizing the code to the national context, launching the code and bringing the signatories on board, helping them with technical assistance and financing, and then reporting. We can talk a lot more about that later. I want to give other people a time to talk, but this path is part of the toolkit that we have on our website, wefinancecode.org, where we're sharing a lot of materials for all of the countries that are implementing the code, and also to help our global partners who are signing onto the code at a global level to find out where they can fit into this. And I'll talk a little bit more about how people can get involved in this later on in the presentation. So let me stop there and pass it back to Nisha.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks for that quick overview. We'll get into now, a little bit and hear from some of the We Finance Code partners about how this is being operationalized and how they're participating in it. So if I can invite Eselina, Inez, and Juan Carlos to join Wendy and me on this virtual stage. Let's see if we can, there we have Eselina. So and Inez. All right, so we'll get started with the conversation. I'm going to direct the first question to you, Eselina. FSD Mozambique has been an early partner with WeFi on the code. Why did you think this was important, given your role with FSD Moz? What do you see as the value of an initiative like this in Mozambique?
Good afternoon and good morning, depending where you are. Thank you, Nisha, for the question, but also thanks for the opportunity to be in this very important webinar where we are discussing the issue of data, the issue of women, the issue of SMEs. So going directly to your question, why I think it's important to be part of this initiative. There are different reasons, maybe that I can highlight it, taking to the context of Mozambique. I'm working at the FSD, and the FSD is one institution that is promoting financial inclusion. And women SME is one of our pillar segments. And I'm seeing that all activity that we can do in order to make sure that more women SME, more women enterprise that are having access for finance to improve what they're doing is a good contribution, what we can do. This is the main reason why we have joined with the open mind to be part of this Wi-Fi code initiative. When it's coming to data, we at FSD were working mostly on data relation. I can share with you here that some years ago we initiated an awareness program advocating so that we end up today, the regulators putting in place a regulation that the disaggregation of data based on sex for individual that are having access to financial services mandatory. So we're now seeing to have some data coming on that one and will help us in that direction. But as far as concerned to SMEs, we have not yet reached that stage. And I see this initiative that is going to push us and to accelerate that objective. So it's why FSD was easily accepting and willing to be part, because it's intrinsically linked to what we have been doing, intrinsically linked to for the very important pillar. Maybe you know, in Mozambique, women are the majority of the population, but unfortunately are the less served by financial institutions. So we need to change that situation.
Thanks, Aselina,
Thank
for
you.
sharing. Yeah. Inez, I'll turn to you. I know the Financial Alliance for Women has been a partner from the get-go with Wi-Fi on the code and, drawing on some of the experiences with some of your members in kind of developing the code as well. So maybe if we can talk a little bit about, what do you see as strategies of operationalizing this code and, specifically working with different actors?
Sure. Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. The roadmap that Wendy showed, those 5 steps, that's basically the roadmap that's being used in the different pilot countries. And of course, as more experience occurs, that will be adapted and fine-tuned. But essentially, if you want, the keys to this are identifying initially some national champions who would be willing to take it on. And there's kind of 2 approaches. So fundamentally, this is a public-private sector collaboration, right? It is neither only public or only private. It's both, right? And just like Juan was talking about in terms of the role of sex disaggregated data in driving financial inclusion, it's really important to think about at least 2 audiences. One are the policymakers and regulators, and the other are the financial services providers. From the financial services providers' perspective, the data is totally key. First of all, to understanding the size of the market and all of that, kind of the opportunity of the women's market is critical. But secondly, to understanding the business case for serving it. And in the past 8 years or so, we've been collecting data from our members on an annual basis, and then we give them benchmarking reports, so they're comparing to peers, which they find very useful. But fundamentally, what that articulates is the business case, and that's showing behavioral characteristics that women have, which include, obviously we all know paying back loans at greater rates in every segment across the globe, right? Savings at greater rates, a great source of stable deposits, paying back loans at greater rates. Loan volumes tend to be below men. So for every $1 a woman saves in a bank, she's borrowing 33 cents. For every $1 a man is saving, he's borrowing $3, right? So we have to change that dynamic. And the key to changing that dynamic is supporting female entrepreneurs. In the data work that's been done to date prior to the code, the emphasis has really been on sex disaggregating individual consumers. And that's because it's much easier to do that than it is on the women SMEs. So this code offers all of us an opportunity to put women entrepreneurs front and center. And what we've seen across the countries that are starting to adopt this is that this is really catching on very quickly, right? So it's galvanizing the ecosystem. It is, to my money, the best opportunity we've had in years to really focus everybody on this important initiative. It also provides a tremendous opportunity to kind of learn across different countries, because obviously the data is the tip of the iceberg, but beneath the data is an ecosystem approach to building the enabling environment to support female entrepreneurs. So that includes incubators, accelerators, mentoring, networking, all of that kind of stuff. So the data is driving the national conversation about who to bring into the room to then mobilize them to act. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. So it's the starting point for, the rest of the steps that need to happen in closing that gap for women entrepreneurs. Eselina, I wanted to ask you, one of the challenges we've seen a lot is, getting financial service providers to the table in an effort like this. So how do you see that either as an opportunity or a challenge in the context of Mozambique and engaging with them? Have you had any discussions already?
Nisha, that question, thanks first. That question that you're putting, what I am looking for ahead for the whole initiative.
Yeah.
I think the important is in the identification and make it as a national so that anyone see the potential, see the needs for their own institution. I think that one is very important, that how do we mobilize, how are we bringing the awareness? We are in good position at the moment. I think it's different what's happened maybe 5 years ago when we initiated that exercise. Why? Because now most financial institutions, now with understanding that they cannot get next level of the institution in the digital era without data. So the issue of data is getting as a critical or as a very important issue within the financial institution. What we have to tell them is that they have to consider that they need to disaggregate also data so that they can understand what type of SMEs that are working, who are those ones. So I think we are in good position, but for sure, we are going to have a challenge. My thinking is that maybe will be also important that we make it clear where we are now.
Yeah.
So that you can see what you can do in order to go to the next step, to the next level. I think that one will be important. But as far as concerned the usage of data, or the importance of data, I think that step has been already disseminated in all institutions by them. So the question will be, are they understand that there is importance to disaggregate those data in terms of SME, and what new product or new things that they have to do for the SMEs to be ready to be really their client and be empowered. So I see challenge and opportunity, but more opportunity than challenge or limitation.
Yeah.
And also the regulator, I think is aligned with that need. So I know that the some central bank through the AFID also have embarrassed the Wi-Fi code. So I do believe that the support for the regulator will help us to push.
Great. Thanks. I think, what you're saying is very important, like bringing in these different actors, as Wendy was saying, and then creating that will at different levels using different incentives. The business case for, being able to make the business case is probably the most important incentive for FSP. So being able to demonstrate that. Inez, I wanted to go back to you because you mentioned, that there's already in the countries where the code is being piloted, you're seeing some results. So it would be really valuable, I think, to hear of some specific examples after, we've talked a little bit in abstract of what the code can do and how it can work.
Sure. Okay, so in the United Kingdom, which is the oldest code, right, set up in 2019, they have 249 signatories. They are from all of the, basically, let's say 3 segments: the commercial banks that do the debt financing and other support services for female entrepreneurs, the angel community that does funding the startups, and the VCs. If you look, a big number I think is important. One was that they, in their demand side research, they found that if they close the gender gap in the entrepreneurial funnel, so that's the difference between men and women in starting up, growing and exiting businesses, they would add £250 billion to the UK GDP. That was an important figure to launch the code, right? To get other people involved. They have just last year, I think early this year, shown us that in 3 years ago, they had 58,000 women start up businesses. And last year it was 150,000, right? So they've threefold increase in the number of startups. So those are very nice and big numbers. If you then move to the DR, what you have there is, so the Dominican Republic has a somewhat similar setup. So the UK, it's more private sector driven with the government. So in the United Kingdom, you have the Department of Trade and Industry, which is responsible for SME development in the country. And that is a common thing you see in Western European countries, right? So the government is very, very instrumental in industrial policy. In emerging markets, the government is definitely there, but the central bank plays a much bigger role, right? So in the Dominican Republic, what we have is we have a constellation, which is the central bank, the superintendent of banks, both regulating, right? And then we have the data aggregator. In that case, is actually just like the UK, the initial data aggregator is the trade association. So it's the bankers association that's going to be aggregating the data there. And then you have the private sector anchors. And so these are leading commercial banks. In the DR's case, the initial one was Banco BHD. They've had a program for women's markets for well over 10 years. And are very, very instrumental in essentially, just like in the UK, by the way, NatWest did this, the CEO there, opening up the Rolodex and calling people and basically persuading others to sign on. So we need to think about, everybody, I think, needs to think about who are the influencers in the system that can influence others. So the DR, you have that constellation of the trade association, the central bank, and the private sector, with the industry, the Department of SMEs and Department of Women from the government very, very involved. And then if you move over to the Netherlands, you see slightly different constellation. The data aggregator there is Deloitte, independent consulting company. They don't have funding from the World Bank, so they are basically putting their hands in their pockets like they are in the UK and contributing. So in the Netherlands, they're paying the data aggregator. And that's a very interesting model, right? Because then you're seeing less dependence on donor funding and so on. So, so different countries are morphing in slightly different ways. But I think the main thing is that, you know, you're signing on to the same thing. You're signing on to reporting the data, as Wendy was saying. You're signing on to appointing a senior leader to drive this nationally and in your own institution. And you're signing on to actually doing something for women SMEs. So it's both financing and non-financial services.
Great. It's really encouraging to hear, you know, what the data has already done in the UK context, and you know, in terms of the number of businesses that are getting access to capital. So hopefully we'll begin to see some of those results in some of the other markets as well. Wendy, I wanted to turn to you because Inez brought up the question of, you know, costs and how the, you know, different stakeholders. So, you know, in the UK and in the Netherlands, the banks are willing to pay for information as a service. But in other countries, what are you seeing, and what is the support WeFi, you know, and the WeFi team is providing for the implementation of this code to different partners beyond the tools you mentioned?
Right, thank you. So we hope that the code will help create sustainable data collection and new products and services and whatnot. So the goal is for this really to be owned at the local level and driven at the local level and supported on an ongoing basis in a mainstream, you know, through mainstream funding sources. But WeFi has provided some support through our implementing partners for 24 countries to pilot the country code. And I'll share in a little bit all those countries. So there is, for those countries, some support to just get things moving and to do some of the initial work. But in addition to that, we do have countries coming to us, and as mentioned, the Netherlands, which is kind of part of our network. We also have Jordan, which GIZ came to us and said, you know, we have the funding. We just want to be part of your network and part of the code and make it happen. So countries can adopt the code without having, you know, funding from WIFI. And for any country that's introducing the code, we have a suite of tools and services that we're providing globally. So first, I mentioned our website earlier, www.wefinancecode.org. And we have on there a lot of guidelines that will enable a country to kind of get started, you know, how to take each step, move down the road, what the philosophy is. More and more, we'll be populating that with tools. It might be tools on how to size the market, on, you know, how FSPs are collecting data, like more efficient ways to collect data. It might be on research tools that are being developed to, you know, understand impact. So we'll be putting tools out there and making those available to any country and the institutions that are signing on to the code. We're also going to be doing global aggregation of the data. So we're working with OECD to work with the country aggregators that Inez talked about that are pulling the data together at the country level, to pull that together annually at the global level through OECD's SME scoreboard, so that we can see a global picture of the trends, you know, from baseline, and then each year, how many more countries are coming online with the data, and how many more institutions are coming online with the data, and ultimately how much more financing is going out the door to women-led SMEs. So that'll be a global report that we'll work with OECD on. We also are signing on some global partners. So even though the nexus of the effort is at the country level, there are some global partners that might be global, you know, ecosystem players. It might, you know, like other donors or other technical assistance providers. But it can also be global banks or banks that have, you know, just a global footprint or a regional footprint across many countries. And they can sign on as global signatories. And then we help make sure those entities are connected into the local ecosystems and able to participate as part of the local systems, or they might be helping us develop global tools and things like that. So there's a big role for these global players as well. We will also be working with the Financial Alliance for Women to develop a learning series for financial service providers so that they can have more information about, you know, especially aspects of data, or rolling this out in terms of product and service development. And then a really important part of what we're doing is building a community of champions across countries. So in each country, we've already mentioned that every institution participating in the code will have a champion, but in each country, we also expect to have 3 to 5 people from those leading agencies, like the regulator, the Bankers Association, maybe a CEO or two, who are really the national champions and who are really driving this forward. And we're building a community around those individuals. We'll bring them actually to London to see what's happened in the UK and to learn about how to make this happen. And then we'll continue to cultivate that as a network of leaders globally to be advocates, understand how better to implement this, and be effective at making sure the change is meaningful, it's sustained, and it's mainstreamed into the local system. So that community of champions is also something we'll tie each country into through the program. So all of this is available to the partners.
Great, thanks for those details. And I think, you know, I would encourage everybody to look at the We Finance Code website and the resources that are available. I don't know if Eselina has stepped away for a minute, so I'll just, oh, she's back. Eselina, before I go to Juan Carlos, question for you, because you're the national level representative on our panel. So where do you see opportunities, you know, and what do you think you need from that long list that Wendy shared of, you know, the kinds of support to operationalize the code in Mozambique and, you know, bring the partners that you need to the table?
Okay, thank you. As an activity, you cannot do alone. You need a support either internally in your organization, but also across other organizations. I think that in the case of Mozambique, we do need a support first in the whole this activity of creating champions in different entities. Coming for a developing country, probably people will have to see what are the incentives, what benefit I'm going, and it is important to have this type of narrative that we are showing what benefit you are going to have in being in code in the end of the day. I just saw that Inez shared the profitability of those institutions that are going. I think those type of information is very important. And within the Wi-Fi initiative, we are expecting that it will be necessary to have technical assistance, particular to this area of data analytics, data analysis. How do you really transform the data for product? How do you really make sure that the data that are captured have quality and can be used? And I think that it's a new area. It's an area that is coming more to the institution. And as we can see, the gender code, the Wi-Fi code will not only be for banks or for commercial institutions. We need also to see what we can do with fintech, with other institutions that are working with that one. So I think if we can have a support, how to deal with all different players will be important, and particular also to see what incentive we can put in place for them in order to implement what we think is a good things. I don't know, Nisha, if
Great. No, thanks. That's very
go.
useful. And I think, I see a lot of questions in the chat about incentives to bring FSPs to the table, because I think all of the people in this audience have been working with financial service providers and realize kind of that seems to be a very big challenge, getting institutions to see the value in collecting and using data. So Juan Carlos, I wanted to turn to you because I saw you nodding vigorously at everything Esselina said. And, maybe you can tell us a little bit about where do you see opportunities, for CGAP to support an effort like this, based on some of the work that's coming out of as a follow-up to the landscape research.
Thank you very much. And I want to emphasize how important the Wi-Fi code is as an initiative. I think this is all the actions that are included in the code and the plans that are on the next steps are super important. And I want to emphasize especially how key is to have champions and leaders to do this work and to take the extra steps. In our conversations with regulators, with providers, we found that change management is quite difficult. Cultural change, to think about the importance of gender disaggregated data, to realize the importance of disaggregating gender data and utilizing this data is key, and we are missing a little bit of that support in some cases. So I think it's so key to have a code that can promote these building championship and building messages across the board, and especially the ecosystemic approach of the code. That's so good, and I think we are all aligned, and we are very happy to have that as a message. We're going to support the operationalization of the Wi-Fi code in different ways. I think one of the main angles of support from CGAP's perspective is helping supervisory authorities better understand how useful gender disaggregated data collection and analysis can be for multiple purposes, for multiple objectives and mandates. And we want to help to provide authorities with some extra guidance and tools to help them better collect, utilize, and disseminate such data. Also taking into account some of the challenges on how to better request, validate, clean, analyze, store, protect, and later on disseminate such data. So we're really trying to help them not only understand the importance, the usefulness for multiple purposes. We're talking with authorities, with different teams within authorities, to let them know it's not only about financial inclusion monitoring, it's also important for prudential purposes, for market conduct, for integrity, for macroeconomic issues. There are a range of issues that are important to have information that is disaggregated by gender. and also to help them. An important point is to help authorities also understand the point of view of the providers, the business case, as Ines was saying, the use case, because sometimes when the provider talk with the authority, they speak in different languages, and we want to help them better understand each other's points of view and their own use cases to help a little bit bridge those gaps. And we're already engaging with a few leading jurisdictions, talking with authorities, for example, in Chile and Rwanda and a few other countries, to understand the journey that they have gone so far, the authorities, the providers, and other actors, to understand the challenges that they faced, so that we can incorporate those lessons in the next guidance. We're going to produce some guidance in the next year that will try to have messages for supervisory authorities, but also other actors such as funders, providers, and then come up with more concrete, specific technical guidance, especially focused on the authorities' work on analyzing and utilizing data. And we are going to keep an eye on all the work that the community is issuing, because I think there's a lot of alignment and a lot of opportunities for all of us to work together. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Juan Carlos. So before I open it up for audience questions, which have been coming in fast, Wendy, I wanted to turn to you for one more question, which is how can this community, Finequity members, which is, a range of actors who work directly with FSPs, work with other ecosystem actors in different countries, engage with the code? What do you see as a few different opportunities?
Thanks. I think we're going to pull up the slide here for
Yeah.
So first of all, thanks, Juan Carlos, for really, just calling out the importance of this being an opportunity, and Inez also, and Inez Selena, to galvanize everybody to work together towards common goals in this area. And I think, I'll close on a couple of those key points of what the secret sauce is here. But just to talk through this slide and the roles that different partners play, we are inviting and calling on all, organizations around the world that are looking at financial inclusion, sex disaggregated data, financial literacy, to find ways to engage on the code, whether it be at the country level or at a global level. And so we're very much, we see this as a very open platform for collaboration, across the whole ecosystem. It's not just working with the partners that WeFi is funding or the countries that WeFi is funding. We really see this as something that can go viral and be a all of network kind of initiative. So what you can see here is we have some global coordinators. WeFi, the Secretariat sits in the World Bank, and we coordinate across our implementing partners. Financial Alliance for Women, which I've already mentioned, and Inez has talked about, their role is providing a lot of the peer learning and training across the programs, and OECD on the data collection. We've also put money out as WeFi, and the Gates Foundation has also put some funding in to help us with these global elements of the code. We're very grateful to them for that. We work with our implementing partners, but there's other implementing partners, which I would say are like the lead agencies in the country, like I mentioned, GIZ, which raised their hand and said, we want to do this. So, who really just are the catalyst for those countries to make this happening, bringing it to the country and helping them embed it locally. Then, as I mentioned, we have the global signatories. Very happy to talk to any entity that is thinking they might want to become a global signatory. We can handle that from the Secretariat, so you can reach out directly to us. As you can see, it's a range. We have FSD Mozambique, or the FSD network is working regionally. Women's World Banking, the World Savings and Retail Bank Institute, and I saw they posted something earlier, was I think our first global signatory. They have a network of banks that they're including to try to bring in more signatories to the code. And then we also have global financial institutions, and Standard Chartered as our first signatory, and they work across many countries and are trying to figure out how to embed the code and the principles of the code in all of the markets they're in. So we're really hoping to engage more with global partners, and we will put them in touch with the partners at the local level where they have operations there, and to tie into the code. You can see at the bottom the countries that we're in, that we have supported. through Asian Development Bank is working in Indonesia with the Islamic Development Bank, working with the Islamic banking system there. And ADB is also supporting Fiji and Sri Lanka. EBRD is in Egypt and Morocco, also the Western Balkans, working across the region, and also Central Asia. IDB Invest is working in Dominican Republic, and the World Bank is working in 8 countries across Africa. And then, as I mentioned, there's a couple other countries that are doing this, you know, kind of through their own means. And we have a lot of other countries that have come to us, or people have started saying, can't we do this here and there, like Pakistan, Bangladesh. We hear Kenya, I saw that on a posting here, Colombia, you know, so we're starting to hear about a lot of other countries that might be interested in joining the code, and we're very happy to do that. I just wanted to reinforce the 2 things that I think have come out of the panel in terms of the secret sauce. And one is incentives. A lot of people here in the chat have talked about incentives. We see the code as an opportunity to create reinforcing incentives. Our partners and other investors in this space have blended finance. They have investment capital to put into this to support financial institutions. They also have technical assistance. There are many donors who are interested at the country level in finding more ways to get more financing out the door. They can become part of this at the local level. We also see, of course, the regulators coming in, and sometimes you might see, you know, the strength and the passion coming from the private sector side, kind of driving the code forward and bringing the regulators along. Other cases, you might see the regulator really driving things and bringing the private sector along. But the idea is that they're all going to be reinforcing action across that ecosystem. So that reinforcing incentive piece is really part of it. And the more partners that start cooperating and coming together at the country level is really going to be the secret of the success here. And then the second piece is what Carlos was just mentioning, is the champions. Juan Carlos was mentioning the champions, and really empowering and finding and, you know, helping those people find their passion and their ability to advocate for this, and really helping them find ways to drive that forward in their community and bring along their peers in their community. So it doesn't just come off as something the World Bank is pushing, or IDB is pushing, or ADB, but, you know, it's really those local champions who are articulating the case. They have the tools to articulate the case. They have the examples of where it's worked, and they're able to talk to their peers and convince them how to move forward, and also bring to bear those carrots and sticks that are available through these reinforcing incentives. So I see those as the 2 kinds of parts of the secret sauce, that when we bring the ecosystem together, the code will really be able to accelerate progress.
Great, thanks, Wendy. You've already started to answer some of the questions, you know, the incentives pieces. You can see there was a lot of interest. I did want to ask on that, either you or Inez, can you give us a couple of specific examples? Performance-based incentives was mentioned in the chat, and I know that, you know, that has been used, or also the kinds of TA maybe that financial institutions have been provided with or have asked for. I think it's always useful to hear some practical examples of what has been done. So maybe Wendy, and then Inez, if you want to add.
Sure, I can say a few words. We definitely have seen our implementing partners doing a lot of work on performance incentives, more and more, I would say, where we're putting in, you know, they're using their own capital to invest in financial institutions, but they're using WeFi funding or other sources of blended finance to provide a performance incentive where institutions are able to reach their stretch goals. So the funding, the donor funding, is only going out the door once they've reached not just, you know, a baseline, but actually stretch targets for growth. Usually that's accompanied with some technical assistance to help those financial institutions understand not just the data side, because they have to first baseline and then do the analytics on the data, but then how to develop the products and services to really meet the needs of women, using, you know, really thinking about the specific needs of women, and also often the internal change that's required to really be a gender sensitive organization, because sometimes those financial institutions need to shine a mirror on their internal processes if they're going to be credible counterparts or really be able to go into the market credibly with these products and services. Again, the champions are really important there. Finding those people in the institutions who are really going to drive that change and understand what change management processes are is really critical here.
Great, thanks. Inez, would you like to add in?
Sure. I mean, I think to add to that, so in my 10, 12 years at the Alliance, what I've seen is that the IFIs are instrumental at the beginning, right, where they're offering concessional finance and then a TA package. And then over time, I think, and I'm sorry to sound like blowing the Alliance's trumpet here, but essentially the more they're engaged in peer learning, where they're learning from fellow bankers in different countries, and we do an awful lot of training and mentoring and stuff like that for members, the more they get convinced, right? So in our mentoring program, for instance, it's exclusively about how do you scale up your program for women's markets. It's not about your own personal growth, right? So often the scaling challenge is to do with, I'm, let's say siloed in SME. I can't get the head of marketing to agree that this needs to be a company-wide strategy. How do I navigate that? How do I identify potential champions in my own organization and persuade them and so on? So a bit like the theory of change, a little bit that Juan was talking about was this, I mean, also FinEquity is a network of champions, right? We need to be smarter about how do we influence and convince other people. And I think participating in peer learning and so on is a really, really effective way of doing that, because what I've noticed about the banking sector is that it's like a revolving door between different banks. So if you're in Zambia working for Stanbic, chances are you've also worked in London, right? And it's or between London and Australia. It's, so it is about, to my mind anyway, for the longevity and sticking with this, because after about 2 years, each of these banks are seeing the profitability. So it's the initial 6 to 18 months that you're kind of they're trying to figure it out. But once they get the data, and because women are brilliant consumers of it, once they're treated well, right? We have the data to support that. They're starting to see it in their own numbers. There's no more convincing required. They have the business case, right? So, and that kind of rolls on, and then they want to participate in a global piece, right? So when we're asking our members, Wendy was there at our annual meeting last year and the year before. And the year before was when we first brought this idea of the coach, the membership. Everybody put their hand up. They want to be part of something bigger. And this helps their business. So we haven't seen the resistance that's been seen on the chat here today. We have seen this take off like wildfire, honestly. It is something people can wrap their heads around. It's very simple in concept, but it's very powerful. And we're going to be seeing, and I think in the next we're already seeing it. I mean, you should see what's happening in the DR. They are having fantastic meetings. They've decided within 4 weeks of, what is the definition of women SME at a national level. They've got they're setting up the APIs to get the data from their institutions. I mean, progress is happening really quickly. I haven't seen progress like this in all my years, actually, to be honest with you. So hats off to Wendy for really making this happen.
Great. I think that's a really excellent note to begin to close this session on, that, it's that initial first step. You need the data to make the case, and you need the champions to get that initial data potentially, and the willingness. And from there on, change can happen relatively rapidly. So starting with a definition of who is, constitutes a women-led MSME, and then moving from there to bring in all the actors and begin to make the business case for supervisors, how it contributes to broader goals, and then bringing all of these actors together. And that's how we kind of realize that opportunity of, inclusive economic growth and women entrepreneurs being a part of that and driving that. So thank you to my panelists, Wendy, Inez, Acelina, Juan Carlos, for sharing some of these insights, the value of having this kind of data and how it can really advance the conversation. We've shared some resources in the chat. We'll be publishing them along with the recording and the slides from today. And feel free to reach out to our panelists if you have additional questions. There's a quick survey at the end of the webinar to hear from you about what you thought was useful. But with that, I'm just going to close for now. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Nisha. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, and